Do you think Mrs. Parker Bowles was a factor in the breakdown of your marriage?
Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded.
They thought he would never find out. They were wrong. Diana spent her final years documenting 20 shocking warnings about Camilla, and she made sure William received every single one. For years, the palace believed they had gotten away with it. Then, without a single word in front of the entire world, William made a move so calculated, it sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace.
I feel like I do, but I think when you are bereaved at a very young age, anytime really, but particularly at a young age, I can resonate closely to that. You feel pain like no other pain.
What he did lasted only seconds, but it changed everything. In February 1981, Diana Spencer was 19 years old when her engagement to Prince Charles was announced to the world. Within days, she had moved into Clarence House, the official London residence she would briefly call home before the wedding. She was young, largely unfamiliar with the inner workings of the royal family, and by most accounts still finding her footing in a world that operated by rules nobody had bothered to explain to her. What happened in those first days, however, set a tone that would define the next 16 years of her life. 2 days after the engagement was made public, Diana found a letter on her bed. It had been placed there, in her room, in a house that was not yet fully hers. The letter was from Camilla Parker Bowles. It was not a card, not a short note of congratulations, but a letter. The message was brief and on the surface entirely pleasant. She wrote that the news was exciting and suggested they have lunch together soon. To most people reading those words, it would appear to be nothing more than a polite gesture from a woman already known within royal circles. Diana, however, understood the gesture for what it was. The letter had not been sent through the post. It had been placed on her bed, inside Clarence House, which raised a question that Diana did not need long to answer. Someone with access had put it there, someone who was comfortable enough in that space to do so. The lunch did take place, and during that lunch, Camilla asked Diana a question that has since been recorded, discussed by multiple biographers. She asked whether Diana intended to hunt at Highgrove. Highgrove was the country estate in Gloucestershire that had recently become Charles's primary rural home. It was a house that Camilla Parker Bowles had been closely associated with for years, long before Diana had come into the picture. The question was not about horses or hunting schedules. Diana recognised it almost immediately as a statement of ownership, a quiet and carefully worded way of communicating that the relationship between Camilla and that house, and by extension between Camilla and Charles, had not ended simply because an engagement had been announced. Diana was 20 years old. She left that lunch with a very clear understanding of the situation she had walked into. What is significant about this early period is not just what happened, but how Diana responded to it. Rather than dismiss what she had seen and felt, or accept the version of events that the people around her seemed to prefer, she began to pay close attention and to document. She later shared what she had observed with the author Andrew Morton, whose 1992 biography drew heavily on her own recorded testimony. Morton's book, Diana, Her True Story, remained one of the most detailed first-hand accounts of her experience inside the royal family, and it drew on her own words, spoken directly into a tape recorder over a series of private sessions. The letter, the lunch, the question about Highgrove, all of it was part of a pattern she had started to recognise before she had even made her wedding vows. The wedding itself took place on the 29th of July, 1981, at St. Paul's Cathedral in London. The scale of the occasion was enormous. An estimated 750 million people watched the ceremony on television around the world, and hundreds of thousands lined the streets of London to see the procession. The images from that day remain among the most recognisable in recent royal history. Diana's dress, designed by David, and Elizabeth Emanuel drew widespread attention. The carriage ride to and from the cathedral was watched by vast crowds who had gathered along the route. It was during that carriage ride that something happened which Diana would later describe in her own words. She spotted Camilla Parker Bowles standing in the crowd along the wedding route. Camilla was wearing a pale grey pillbox hat with a white veil. According to Diana's own account, as recorded by Morton, the position Camilla occupied along the route had been arranged by Charles himself. She had been placed there on his own wedding day to watch the procession. Diana saw her. She recognised her immediately. And in describing that moment to Morton years later, the word she used was not grief, not hurt, not betrayal. The word she used was ridiculous. That choice of language is worth sitting with for a moment, because it says something about how Diana processed what she was experiencing. She was not in denial. She was not pretending. It was something other than what it was. She found it ridiculous in the truest sense of that word, meaning that the whole arrangement had a quality of absurdity to it that she was not willing to pretend she couldn't see. The account was corroborated in Morton's book, which was first published in 1992 while Diana was still alive, and later reissued in 1997 after her death with additional material that confirmed Diana herself had been the primary source throughout. Morton has consistently maintained the integrity of that sourcing, and Diana's recorded tapes were eventually made public, removing any ambiguity about who had spoken those words and in what context. What emerges from both of these early moments, the letter and the wedding, is a portrait of a young woman who was paying close attention to her circumstances, at a time when those around her may have expected her not to. She was not, by any stretch, naive about what she had observed. She had walked into Clarence's house, found a letter on her bed from a woman who had a long-standing relationship with her future husband, attended a lunch where that same woman staked a quiet claim over a shared home, and then sat in a carriage on her own wedding day and watched that woman standing in the crowd, placed there by the groom. All of this happened before she had finished speaking her vows. Diana's response, as she later described it, was to stop pretending. She made a decision, conscious or otherwise, not to gaslight herself about what she was seeing. That decision would shape the years that followed in ways that become clearer the further through her story one looks. She began to keep a record, not immediately in any formal sense, but she started to hold on to details, names, dates, observations. She spoke to people she trusted. She eventually spoke to Morton. She later spoke to television cameras. The record she kept was not the product of paranoia, as some in the palace would later attempt to argue. It was the product of someone who understood very early on that what was being presented to the outside world and what was actually happening were two entirely different things. The letter on her bed and the figure in the grey hat at her wedding are two moments that sit at the very beginning of that record. They are also the moments that Diana herself returned to when she was explaining, in her own words, how she had come to understand her situation. She did not begin from a place of suspicion or hostility. She began from a place of direct experience. She saw what she saw, she heard what she heard, and rather than explain it away, she held on to it. That instinct, to document rather than dismiss, would become one of the most consequential things about her in the years that followed. By the time she left that lunch with Camilla, and by the time that carriage had carried her past the woman in the grey hat, Diana had already started to understand that the version of her marriage being presented to the world was not the version she was living. That gap between the public image and the private reality would define much of what came next, and it began, by her own account, within days of the engagement being announced, before the dress had been finished, before the vows had been spoken, before any of the rest of it had even started. By the early 1990s, the marriage between Diana and Charles had deteriorated beyond any reasonable pretense of normalcy. What had begun as a troubled union, visible in its dysfunction to those close to it almost from the start, had by this point become something more organized in its cruelty. The difficulties Diana faced were no longer simply the product of a failing marriage. They had taken on a shape and a structure that pointed towards something deliberate. Understanding what happened during this period requires looking not just at individual incidents, but at the pattern they form when placed alongside one another. Within Charles's private circle, Diana had been given a nickname. The words used were "that mad cow." This was not a throwaway comment made once and forgotten. Royal biographer Tom Bower documented the phrase in his 2018 book, Rebel Prince, attributing it to Camilla Parker Bowles and noting its use within the social world that surrounded Charles. The significance of those two words goes beyond their obvious unpleasantness. Language of that kind, applied consistently and within a closed circle, serves a very specific function. If a woman can be made to sound unstable, irrational, or hysterical in private conversation, then anything she says publicly becomes easier to dismiss. Her observations carry less weight. Her complaints are more easily reframed as symptoms of a troubled mind rather than responses to real events. The nickname was, in that sense, a foundation for something larger that came later. In 1989, 8 years into the marriage, an incident took place at Annabelle's nightclub in London that has since been verified by multiple sources. The occasion was a birthday celebration for Camilla Parker Bowles' sister. At some point during the evening, Charles and Camilla disappeared from the party. Diana went to find them. What followed has been confirmed on tape and verified to ITV by Ken Wharf, a royal protection officer who worked closely with Diana for several years and later wrote about his experiences. Diana stood in front of Camilla, in a room full of people who were loyal to Charles and spoke directly. According to the account Wharf confirmed, she said that she knew exactly what was going on between Camilla and Charles, that she was clearly in the way, and that she did not want to be treated like an idiot. Then she left. The significance of that moment is not simply that Diana confronted Camilla. It is the calculation involved. She was in a room where the social loyalties ran almost entirely against her. The people present were Charles's people, part of the circle that had been around him long. Before Diana arrived, speaking openly in that setting carried real consequences, and she did it anyway, with witnesses present. After that evening, something shifted in her approach. She stopped waiting for anyone within the institution to intervene or to acknowledge what was happening. She began instead to keep a more deliberate record, holding on to names, dates, and details. According to what she later communicated to those she trusted, she was building a file, not for herself alone, but for her son, who would one day inherit everything that World represented. September 1995 marked the beginning of William's time at Eton College. Before he left, Diana gave him what she had accumulated. Every incident she had documented, dated, and confirmed was passed to him. The evidence for this comes from William himself, who in 2021 described the fear, paranoia, and isolation that he said he remembered from his mother's final years. The precision of that recollection, the specific, emotional texture he described is difficult to account for without some form of documentation having been shared with him. A general sense of a difficult period fades over time. Detailed, specific memories of particular feelings and circumstances do not persist in that way unless something preserved them. She had chosen not to protect him from the reality of what she had experienced. She had chosen instead to make sure he understood it, fully and with evidence. What Diana was preparing him for was not simply the knowledge of her own unhappy marriage. She was preparing him for the institution itself, for the way it operated when it felt threatened, and for the specific individuals who had worked against her. That preparation would prove relevant sooner than she may have anticipated. In 1992, Andrew Morton's book had been published, and the public response had been overwhelming. Diana's account of her experience inside the royal family generated enormous sympathy and shifted public opinion in ways the palace could not easily manage. The response from within the institution was not to address the substance of what she had described. It was to target her credibility. Ken Wharf, who had served as her protection officer and was a direct witness to significant portions of this period, later confirmed publicly that a coordinated campaign had been run from within St. James's Palace. The objective, as he described it, was to airbrush Diana out of history. This was not a matter of spin or reputation management in any ordinary sense. It was a structured operation run by spin doctors working inside the palace, designed to reframe how she was perceived. The clinical language of mental illness began to appear in enough places, distributed through enough channels, that it started to acquire the texture of something official. Words like borderline and unstable were circulated to journalists. The strategy was to make the labels stick so thoroughly that Diana's own words, her own testimony, her own observations about what had been done to her, could be dismissed as the output of an unstable mind rather than taken seriously on their own terms. Tom Bower's documentation in Rebel Prince placed Camilla as having used that same language in 1995, privately, in reaction to Diana giving her testimony to Morton. By that point, the coordinated effort to discredit Diana had been running for several years. The language that appeared in official channels and in whispered conversations within the palace social world was not arriving from different directions independently. It was part of the same operation, sustained over time and resourced accordingly. Then came Martin Bashir. In the lead-up to Diana's 1995 Panorama interview, Bashir had approached her brother Earl Spencer and shown him documents that appeared to be bank statements. The statements were fabricated. They purported to show that members of the royal household staff had been paid to spy on Diana. Spencer passed on what he had seen to his sister. Her anxiety deepened. She agreed to the interview. The the 2021 Dyson Report, commissioned by the BBC and led by former Supreme Court Justice Lord Dyson, confirmed that Bashir had used deceitful methods that constituted a serious breach of the BBC's own editorial standards. William later confirmed that the lies involved had substantially influenced what his mother said on camera during that interview. The programme has since been seen by hundreds of millions of people around the world, and it has shaped how Diana is understood and remembered. The account she gave was extracted through manufactured fear. They did not simply record her being frightened, they created the conditions for that fear first, and then filmed it. The Panorama interview aired on the 20th of November, 1995. Diana spoke openly about the state of her marriage, about her struggles with mental health, and about the affair between Charles and Camilla. The audience in Britain that evening was among the largest ever recorded for a documentary programme. But the context in which that interview had been obtained, the forged documents, the deliberate manipulation of a woman's fears to secure her participation was not known publicly at the time. It would take until 2021 for an official investigation to confirm what had actually happened. August 31st, 1997. Diana died in a car crash in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris. She was 36 years old. Her sons were at Balmoral. According to palace staff accounts documented by the author Christopher Anderson, Charles made a phone call to Camilla Parker Bowles within the hour after Diana's death was confirmed. The words attributed to him in those accounts were, "My darling, what is going to happen to us now?" The morning had not yet begun. Her sons were asleep in a building that did not yet know their mother was gone, and that call had already been made. Diana had spoken to William about how the institution operated. She had told him that when it faced a crisis, its first instinct was to protect itself, not to grieve, not to pause, but to calculate. She had told him so that he would recognize it when he saw it. That phone call, made within 60 minutes of her death being confirmed, was exactly what she had described. And William, 15 years old, sleeping at Balmoral, was already surrounded by the evidence of everything she had warned him about. The nickname, the confrontation at Annabelle's, the documented file she handed him before he left for school, the coordinated smear campaign run out of St. James's Palace, the forged bank statements that shaped one of the most watched interviews in television history, and the phone call made before the sun had risen on the morning she died. These are not isolated incidents. They form a sequence, and that sequence has sources attached to it. Worf confirmed it. Bauer documented it. The Dyson Report investigated it. Anderson recorded it. What Diana understood, and what she worked to make sure William understood too, was that this was not a series of coincidences. It was a machine, and it had been running for a very long time. Within 12 months of Diana's death, while her sons were still visibly grieving and the world was still processing the loss of one of the most recognized figures on the planet, a meeting took place at Highgrove. The people present were Charles, Camilla Parker Bowles, and Mark Boland, who held the position of Deputy Private Secretary to Charles and had been brought in specifically to manage the prince's public image. The purpose of the meeting was not informal. It had a defined objective, a budget attached to it, and a consultant assigned to carry it out. Tom Bauer, in his 2018 book, Rebel Prince, documented the language used to describe that objective. The goal, as recorded, was to dethronize Diana by radically changing her image and portraying her as a manipulative hysteric. Those were not loose words spoken in frustration. They were the terms of a brief written and agreed upon, targeting a woman who had been dead for less than a year, while her children were still sleeping in black. The operation to rehabilitate Camilla and to diminish Diana's legacy did not begin spontaneously after Diana's death. The groundwork had already been laid while she was still alive. In May 1997, 3 months before she died, a private lunch had taken place at Highgrove. The attendees were Charles, Camilla, Mark Boland, and Peter Mandelson, who at that moment was one of the most powerful and well-connected political strategists in Britain, serving as a key figure in Tony Blair's inner circle. The agenda for that lunch, according to the accounts that have since been reported, was the question of how to make Camilla acceptable to the British public as a future queen. Diana was alive when that conversation happened. The campaign to position her replacement was already being planned and resourced before she had gone. Diana found out about the meeting. She passed every name involved to William, and she told him directly that those people would always protect Camilla's position, without exception, and that he needed to understand that clearly. There was also a second phone call made on the night Diana died that receives far less attention than the first. Within 60 minutes of her death being confirmed, Charles was already on the phone to Bolland, his PR strategist, asking how to manage the public reaction. Christopher Anderson documented this in his account, drawing on palace staff sources. The timing matters enormously. The boys were asleep. The news had barely been absorbed by the people closest to the situation, and the institutional machinery was already calculating how to handle the fallout from a public relations perspective. Diana had prepared William for exactly this. She had told him that the institution's first response to any crisis was self-preservation, that grief and protocol and human feeling came second to the question of how things would look and how the narrative could be managed. The phone call to Bolland, made before the morning had started, was a precise illustration of everything she had described to him. While all of this was happening around him, Martin Bashir had not confined his manipulative behaviour to Diana alone. He had also told Diana that Tiggy Legger-Burke, the woman employed as a nanny and companion to William and Harry, had secretly become pregnant by Charles. This was entirely fabricated. There was no truth to it, but the intention behind it was clear. It was designed to make Diana doubt and potentially turn against the one person her sons had come to trust outside of their immediate family. It did not target Diana's public reputation or her credibility with journalists. It targeted something far more personal, which was her relationship with her children and the people closest to them. The 2021 Dyson report confirmed that BBC employees had made what it adds, described as lurid and false claims that played directly on Diana's fears. William's public statement in 2021 did not describe his mother as a woman who had been paranoid. It described what had been deliberately engineered to make her appear that way, and it drew a clear line between those two things. What is striking about all of this, the Highgrove meeting, the Mandelson lunch, the second phone call, the fabricated story about the nanny, is that Diana had known about most of it. She had documented what she knew and passed it to William before he left for Eton in September 1995. He was 12 years old when she first began sharing the record with him. He was 15 when she died. In the 2 years between those points, she gave him everything she had. Every name, every pattern, every move she had witnessed and logged. She knew she could not count on the institution to protect him from the version of events it preferred. So she made sure he had the version that was true. What William did with that information in the years that followed is where the story moves from what was done to Diana toward what she built in him. One of the earliest and most deliberate examples came in 2016, when William, alongside Kate and Harry, launched Heads Together, a campaign placing mental health at the centre of their public work. The timing and the framing of that initiative are worth considering carefully. Diana had spent years being described through coordinated and unofficial channels as unstable and borderline and hysterical. Those labels had been deployed as tools to discredit her, to make her testimony seem unreliable, and to redirect public sympathy away from what she was actually saying. She had warned William about the power of that kind of language and about the importance of controlling it before it could be turned against him. She had told him that whoever names something first shapes what people believe about it. Heads Together arrived before any comparable crisis had emerged for William or his family. It was not a reactive measure. It was a deliberate choice to occupy the ground of mental health publicly, to speak about it openly and without stigma, before anyone could attempt to weaponize the language around it. The campaign took the very category of language that had been used to silence Diana and placed it in a context of openness, care, and public service. It was not a coincidence that William chose this particular area of work. He had been told precisely what those labels could do, and he moved to disarm them in advance. Then came December 2025. William took his 12-year-old son, Prince George, to a homeless shelter in Victoria, London, called The Passage. Diana had first brought William to the same shelter in 1993, when he was also around that age. She had believed and had said publicly that one of the most important things a future king could understand was what ordinary life looked like for people who had nothing, that sitting in a palace and speaking at people from a distance was not the same as standing alongside them. She called it leading from the heart rather than from protocol, and she practiced it consistently throughout her public life. When William and George arrived at the passage in December 2025, George was asked to sign the visitor's book. He signed on the same page where Diana and a young William had signed their names in 1993. 32 years separated those two signatures. George looked at his grandmother's handwriting on that same page and said, simply, "Wow." The shelter, the book, the page, the handwriting, none of it had been staged for effect. The passage had kept that book for decades. The fact that two signatures from 1993 were still there to be found was not something that could have been arranged. It was simply the result of a father choosing to bring his son to the same place his own mother had brought him, for the same reason, to show him what the work actually looked like when it was done honestly and without distance. Diana had told William to be a leader of people's hearts. That phrase was not abstract to her. She had spent years demonstrating what she meant by it, visiting hospitals and hospices and shelters, sitting with people rather than standing over them, refusing to interact with the public through layers of formality and managed distance. She had brought William with her on those visits deliberately, not just as a child tagging along, but as someone she was consciously preparing. She wanted him to understand, from direct experience and not from instruction, what it meant to show up as a person rather than as a title. The visit to the passage in 2025 was one of the clearest examples of that preparation bearing fruit. George, standing in front of his grandmother's handwriting, was the third generation of that particular lesson. Diana had given it to William in 1993. William gave it to George in 2025. The message had not changed. The book it was written in had not changed either. What Diana had passed to William was not simply information about the people who had worked against her, it was also a model of how to do the work differently, how to use the position not as a mechanism of distance and authority, but as a means of genuine connection. That model, carried forward through a father to a son, was exactly what she had intended when she brought a young boy to a shelter in Victoria more than 3 decades earlier. On the 7th of May 2023, a concert was held at Windsor Castle to celebrate the coronation of King Charles III. The event drew a crowd of around 20,000 people gathered on the grounds, with hundreds of millions more watching on television around the world. It was, by any measure, one of the most watched royal occasions in years. The cameras were everywhere, covering every angle of the stage. The crowd and the royal family assembled in full view of the public. For William, who had spent his entire life in front of those cameras and who understood precisely what every gesture communicated to a global audience, the evening represented something that went well beyond a public celebration. At one point during the event, King Charles and Queen Camilla walked along the line where William, Kate and their children were standing. Kate curtsied to both. William bowed to his father, a deep and correct bow, exactly as protocol required. George and Charlotte followed their father's lead. Then Camilla walked past William and he stood straight. No bow, no curtsy, nothing. The absence of a gesture is itself a gesture, and in that setting, in front of that audience, with those cameras rolling, the absence was visible to anyone paying attention. Body language analyst Judy James examined the footage and commented on it publicly for The Express, describing it as a unique example of selective bowing that she suggested could reflect William siding, even if not entirely consciously, with his late mother. The word subconsciously does not hold up to much scrutiny when applied to a man who has been trained since childhood in the language of royal public appearances. William knows what a bow communicates. He knows what the absence of one communicates. He knows that cameras at events like that one are not simply recording a celebration, but are producing a historical document. Every frame of that footage will be studied, archived, and referenced for decades. That is not a context in which a man of his experience and preparation makes an accidental omission. The moment was precise. Diana had given him every name, every pattern, every documented account of what had been done in Camilla's name and with Camilla's involvement. On that evening in May 2023, with the world watching, he made a choice that required no words and left no room for misinterpretation to those who were paying close enough attention. The relationship between William and the BBC had been building toward a reckoning for years before it arrived publicly. On the 20th of May 2021, William stood in front of a camera at Kensington Palace without notes and without anyone standing beside him. What he said that day was not handed to a spokesperson or released through a prepared written statement. He delivered it himself, in his own words, directly to camera. He stated that it was his firm view that the Panorama programme held no legitimacy and should never be aired again. He said that the BBC had let his mother down. He named the failures involved and described them as having contributed significantly to his mother's fear, paranoia, and isolation in her final years. His name was on every word. His face was on camera as he said them. That statement followed the publication of the Dyson Report, the independent investigation commissioned by the BBC and led by Lord Dyson, a former justice of the UK Supreme Court. The report confirmed that Martin Bashir had used fabricated documents and deceitful methods to secure Diana's participation in the 1995 Panorama interview, and that this conduct constituted a serious breach of the BBC's own editorial standards. The BBC accepted the findings. William's response was to go beyond accepting the findings quietly. He made clear, in terms that were unambiguous and permanently recorded, that he held the institution accountable and that the programme it had produced using those methods should not be treated as a legitimate piece of journalism or broadcast again. Diana had spent years having her credibility systematically undermined by people who used the language of mental illness and instability to discredit her testimony. Her son stood in front of a camera and named the people and the institution responsible for manufacturing the fear that had shaped one of her most significant public moments. He did not ask anyone else to carry that message. He carried it himself. The men Charles had employed to manage his image and to coordinate the campaign against Diana's reputation had each left a documented record of what they had done and who had directed it. Mark Bolland, Peter Mandelson, Martin Bashir. Each of them had been named in books, reports, and verified accounts. William had been given those names by Diana before she died. He had watched everything that followed her death with the context she had provided. And he had been using that documented record ever since, not through private grievance or informal pressure, but through public statements made in his own name, on camera, in ways that could not be walked back or reinterpreted. Beyond the BBC statement and the coronation moment, there is a more structural form of power that William holds, and it concerns a title. Camilla currently holds the title of Queen Consort. That title was granted by Charles, and it exists because Charles sits on the throne. Diana had told William clearly that the title was not permanent in any way that fell outside of William's eventual control. It was the wife of his father, not a position that carried independent standing beyond Charles's reign. Angela Levin, who wrote a biography of Camilla published in 2022, documented that William had made his position clear within family dynamics, specifically that he regarded Camilla as his father's wife and not as a grandmother to his children. When Charles's reign ends and William ascends to the throne, the title of Queen Consort does not automatically transfer or carry forward. It dissolves with the reign that created it. Whether Camilla holds any title at all under King William will be entirely his decision to make. He has not forgotten a single name from the record his mother kept. The answer to that question has not been stated publicly, but it is already written in everything he has done and said since 1997. What Diana was building in him during those final years at Eton was not simply a collection of evidence about Camilla or the palace or the BBC, it was something more complete than that. In the months and years before her death, while Mandelson was planning and Bashir was forging and the machine was running its coordinated operation, she was sitting with her son during his school visits and giving him everything she had learned the hard way. Every name, every pattern, every institutional mechanism she had been subjected to, every way in which the people around her had tried to make her seem less credible, less stable, less worth listening to. She passed all of it to him, not to fill him with bitterness, as she herself reportedly said, but to fill him with clarity. She wanted him to understand what he was going to be dealing with. She wanted him to walk into it with his eyes open, the way she had wished someone had prepared her before that letter appeared on her bed at Clarence House in February 1981. She died on the 31st of August, 1997. William was 15 years old. The last time he saw her had been that summer, when he had said goodbye before returning to school. Whatever passed between them in those final visits. Whatever she gave him in those last conversations, he has been carrying it ever since. It is visible in the bow he did not give at Windsor Castle in May 2023. It is visible in the statement he delivered to camera in May 2021 with no notes and no spokesperson beside him. It is visible in the mental health work he began in 2016 before anyone had cause to apply those labels to him. It is visible in the decision to take his 12-year-old son to the same shelter in Victoria that Diana had taken him to in 1993, and to stand there while George looked at his grandmother's handwriting in a book that had been kept for more than 30 years. Diana did not leave William a record of grievances. She left him a record of facts, verified and documented, about the people and the institution he would one day be responsible for. She taught him how to lead with honesty rather than distance, how to speak to people rather than at them, how to name things before they could be used against him, and how to hold people accountable on the public record in a way that could not be managed or spun away. Kate's decision in March 2024 to sit in her garden and tell the world herself that she had cancer without a spokesperson and without a prepared institutional statement was the clearest possible demonstration that Diana's approach had not only been preserved but had been understood as something that actually worked. The palace had spent years calling Diana's instinct reckless. Kate's announcement became the most watched royal moment of that year, and it carried the same quality Diana had always brought to her public presence, which was the quality of a person speaking directly and honestly to another person, without the machinery of the institution standing between them. Every move William has made since 1997 traces back, in one way or another, to a conversation with his mother. The coronation moment, the BBC statement, the mental health campaign, George at the passage, the question of a title that only he will answer. Diana did not predict what was coming in any mystical sense. She documented what she had experienced, assessed the patterns she had identified, and gave her son the tools to deal with all of it when his time came. She ran out of time before she could finish. He has been finishing it ever since, in her name, on the record, in front of the cameras she taught him how to use.